Chapters 30 to 33 of Tristram Shandy, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, Volume 3, by Laurence Sterne. Chapter 30. No, I think I have advanced nothing, replied my father, making answer to a question which Yorick had taken the liberty to put to him. I have advanced nothing in the Tristrapedia, but what is as clear as any one proposition in Euclid. Reach me, Trim, that book from off the scrutoire. It has ofttimes been in my mind, continued my father, to have read it over both to you, Yorick, and to my brother Toby, and I think it a little unfriendly in myself in not having done it long ago. Shall we have a short chapter or two now, and a chapter or two hereafter, as occasions serve, and so on till we get through the whole? My uncle Toby and Yorick made the obeisance which was proper, and the corporal, though he was not included in the compliment, laid his hand upon his breast, and made his bow at the same time. The company smiled. Trim, quoth my father, has paid the full price for staying out the entertainment. He did not seem to relish the play, replied Yorick. 'Twas a tomfool battle, and please your reverence, of Captain Trippet's and that other officer, making so many somersets as they advanced. The French come on capering now and then in that way, but not quite so much. My uncle Toby never felt the consciousness of his existence with more complacency than what the corporal's, and his own reflections, made him do at that moment. He lighted his pipe. Yorick drew his chair closer to the table. Trim snuffed the candle. My father stirred up the fire, took up the book, coughed twice, and begun. Chapter 31. The first 30 pages, said my father, turning over the leaves, are a little dry, and as they are not closely connected with the subject, for the present we'll pass them by. 'Tis a prefatory introduction, continued my father, or an introductory preface, for I am not determined which name to give it, upon political or civil government, the foundation of which being laid in the first conjunction betwixt male and female, for procreation of the species, I was insensibly led into it. 'Twas natural, said Yorick. The original of society, continued my father, I'm satisfied, is what Politian tells us, i.e. merely conjugal, and nothing more than the getting together of one man and one woman, to which, according to Hesiod, the philosopher adds a servant. But supposing in the first beginning there were no men-servants born, he lays the foundation of it in a man, a woman, and a bull. I believe 'tis an ox, quoth Yorick, quoting the passage. Oikon men protista gunaikate bun taratira. A bull must have given more trouble than his head was worth. But there is a better reason still, said my father, dipping his pen into his ink, for the ox being the most patient of animals, and the most useful withal in tilling the ground for their nourishment, was the properest instrument, and emblem too, for the new-joined couple, that the creation could have associated with them. And there is a stronger reason, added my uncle Toby, than them all, for the ox. My father had not power to take his pen out of his inkhorn till he had heard my uncle Toby's reason. For when the ground was tilled, said my uncle Toby, and made worth enclosing, then they began to secure it by walls and ditches, which was the origin of fortification. True, true, dear Toby, cried my father, striking out the bull, and putting the ox in his place. My father gave Trim a nod to snuff the candle, and resumed his discourse. I enter upon this speculation, said my father carelessly, and half shutting the book, as he went on, merely to show the foundation of the natural relation between a father and his child, the right and jurisdiction over whom he acquires these several ways. First, by marriage; second, by adoption; third, by legitimation; and fourth, by procreation, all which I consider in their order. I lay a light stress upon one of them, replied Yorick. The act, especially where it ends there, in my opinion, conveys as little obligation upon the child as it conveys power to the father. You are wrong, said my father argutely, and for this plain reason. I own, added my father, that the offspring, upon this account, is not so under the power and jurisdiction of the mother. But the reason, replied Yorick, equally holds good for her. She is under authority herself, said my father. And besides, continued my father, nodding his head and laying his finger upon the side of his nose, as he assigned his reason, she is not the principal agent, Yorick. In what? Quoth my uncle Toby, stopping his pipe. Though by all means, added my father, not attending to my uncle Toby, the son ought to pay her respect, as you may read, Yorick, at large, in the first book of the Institutes of Justinian, at the 11th title, and the 10th section. I can read it as well, replied Yorick, in the Catechism, chapter 32. Trim can repeat every word of it by heart, quoth my uncle Toby. Puh! said my father, not caring to be interrupted with Trim's saying his catechism. He can, upon my honour, replied my uncle Toby. Ask him, Mr. Yorick, any question you please. The 5th commandment, Trim, said Yorick, speaking mildly, and with a gentle nod, as to a modest catechumen. The corporal stood silent. You don't ask him right, said my uncle Toby, raising his voice and giving it rapidly, like the word of command. The 5th, cried my uncle Toby. I must begin with the 1st, and please your honour, said the corporal. Yorick could not forbear smiling. Your reverence does not consider, said the corporal, shouldering his stick like a musket, and marching into the middle of the room, to illustrate his position, that 'tis exactly the same thing as doing one's exercise in the field. Join your right hand to your firelock, cried the corporal, giving the word of command, and performing the motion. Poise your firelock, cried the corporal, doing the duty still both of adjutant and private man. Rest your firelock. One motion, and please your reverence, you see leads into another. If his honour will begin but with the 1st. The 1st, cried my uncle Toby, setting his hand upon his side. The 2nd, cried my uncle Toby, waving his tobacco pipe as he would have done his sword at the head of a regiment. The corporal went through his manual with exactness, and having honoured his father and mother, made a low bow and fell back to the side of the room. Everything in this world, said my father, is big with jest, and has wit in it, and instruction too, if we can but find it out. Here is the scaffold work of instruction, its true point of folly, without the building behind it. Here is the glass for pedagogues, preceptors, tutors, governors, gerund grinders, and bear leaders, to view themselves in their true dimensions. Oh, there is a husk and shell, Yorick, which grows up with learning, which their unskilfulness knows not how to fling away. Sciences may be learned by rote, but wisdom not. Yorick thought my father inspired. I will enter into obligations this moment, said my father, to lay out all my Aunt Dinah's legacy in charitable uses, of which, by the by, my father had no high opinion. If the corporal has any one determinate idea annexed to any one word he has repeated. Prithee, Trim, quoth my father, turning round to him, what dost thou mean by honouring thy father and mother, allowing them, and please your honour, 3 halfpence a day, out of my pay, when they grow old? And didst thou do that, Trim? Said Yorick. He did indeed, replied my uncle Toby. Then, Trim, said Yorick, springing out of his chair, and taking the corporal by the hand, thou art the best commentator upon that part of the Decalogue, and I honour thee more for it, Corporal Trim, than if thou hadst had a hand in the Talmud itself. Chapter 33. O blessed health, cried my father, making an exclamation, as he turned over the leaves to the next chapter. Thou art before all gold and treasure. 'Tis thou who enlargest the soul, and openest all its powers to receive instruction and to relish virtue. He that has thee has little more to wish for, and he that is so wretched as to want thee, wants everything with thee. I have concentrated all that can be said upon this important head, said my father, into a very little room. Therefore we'll read the chapter quite through. My father read as follows. The whole secret of health depending upon the due contention for mastery betwixt the radical heat and the radical moisture. You have proved that matter of fact, I suppose, above, said Yorick. Sufficiently, replied my father. In saying this, my father shut the book, not as if he resolved to read no more of it, for he kept his forefinger in the chapter, nor pettishly, for he shut the book slowly, his thumb resting, when he had done it, upon the upper side of the cover, as his 3 fingers supported the lower side of it, without the least compressive violence. I have demonstrated the truth of that point, quoth my father, nodding to Yorick, most sufficiently in the preceding chapter. Nor could the man in the moon be told that a man in the earth had wrote a chapter sufficiently demonstrating that the secret of all health depended upon the due contention for mastery betwixt the radical heat and the radical moisture, and that he had managed the point so well that there was not one single word, wet or dry, upon radical heat or radical moisture throughout the whole chapter, or a single syllable in it, pro or con, directly or indirectly, upon the contention betwixt these 2 powers in any part of the animal economy. O thou eternal maker of all beings, he would cry, striking his breast with his right hand, in case he had one, thou whose power and goodness can enlarge the faculties of thy creatures to this infinite degree of excellence and perfection, what have we Moonites done? End of chapters 30 to 33.